Morning, everybody. Everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, thank you all this morning for joining us for Coffee with Kevin, and I appreciate you being here. So this morning, we're going to do the beginning of this a little bit differently after what came up in our last Coffee with Kevin's. We ended up impromptu talking about one of my favorite recipes for Thanksgiving. So this morning, we're going to do a quick 10 minutes of cooking with Kevin, or as I like to call it more accurately, baking. But we're going to do this today because it came up at the last Coffee with Kevin, because this is just a fun thing for us to do. And honestly, a bit of celebration. It's the holidays, and we just finished a semester that 4 months ago, we didn't even know if we could do it. And we did. We pulled it off. And the reason we pulled it off is because of all of you. It's because of all of your efforts and efforts of this entire university community to pull off this semester. So thank you for that and everything that you do. And then this is just for fun for 10 minutes. And then at the end of 10 minutes, we're going to get to our normal Coffee with Kevin. We'll go through the business things we need to talk about. We'll discuss what's on everybody's mind. And so I appreciate you letting me have just 10 minutes here to talk about baking for a little bit. Now, as always, Jenny Larimore is our moderator. So she's going to take your questions. So if you have questions, get them into Jenny. And then she'll have the questions. She'll feed them to me. So for these first few minutes, we're going to talk about baking Aunt Catherine's cinnamon rolls. Now, they're called Aunt Catherine's cinnamon rolls because this is her recipe. Aunt Catherine was actually my great Aunt Catherine. So she was my grandmother's sister. And she used to bake these around the holidays. And then I remember them fondly from my whole holiday time growing up. And now I have the recipe. And I usually make them in this bowl. I make them in this bowl because this bowl was actually my great-grandma's. My great-grandma passed it on to my grandma, and my grandma passed it on to my mom, and my mom gave it to me just recently, in fact. So this would have been my Aunt Catherine's mom's bowl that she used to bake bread in. So I make it in that. We'll get to that in a bit because it's got one of our dough in there already rising. So Aunt Catherine's cinnamon pull-aparts. First thing is you start the recipe with 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. I use active dry yeast. So already measured out in my bowl is my 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. And next thing in this recipe is you have to scald your milk, which very different than scalding your milk, entirely different. But you have to scald your milk. And I put in the recipe the details on how you scald your milk. So you heat it up on the stove over medium heat. You stir fairly regularly, but not quite constantly, because you need to watch for bubbles to form around the edge. The bubbles around the edge is when you get to the scalding point, but you got to stop before you get to a boil. Don't boil your milk, just scald it. So if you're using a thermometer, it's at about 170 degrees. I don't use a thermometer. I just stir regularly, but not constantly, and let it form that bubble on the edge and a little film on the top, that film that milk can get when you cook it. So this batch of milk, of a cup of milk, already has a film on the top because I already scalded it. And then you got to let it cool. That's really important. Let it cool after you have scalded it to about 80 to 90 degrees. Because if you pour 170 degree milk into your yeast, you'll ruin your yeast. It can't handle that kind of temperature. So you got to let it cool down. And I like to just let it cool for a while until I can put my finger in it. It feels like a baby's bottle temperature. I don't use a thermometer again. So we're going to add our scalded milk into our yeast and just dump it in there. And then we're going to let it set. We're going to let it sit for the yeast to activate for about 7 to 10 minutes. Now, when I talked about the sawtooth rolls, I talked about watching your yeast activate and watching it bloom. For some reason, when the yeast is in milk, it doesn't bloom quite the same way, so you can't really watch for it. It does change, but not in the same way. So what I always do is just wait 7 to 10 minutes and then let it activate. Now, because we're trying to get through this in 10 minutes, I'm not going to wait that long. So I'm going to, too soon than I'm supposed to, add the rest of my ingredients. But just remember, at this point, you want to wait 7 to 10 minutes to let your yeast activate in that warm milk. Once it's activated, you go through the rest of your ingredients just in order and put them all in one after the other. Don't worry about mixing in between. So next is your 4 tablespoons of shortening. So I just use traditional Crisco shortening. So the shortening goes in next. Then you got 2 tablespoons of sugar and 2 beaten eggs. So I always beat the eggs first so they look like, I don't know if you can see them very well, but they look like they're getting ready to be scrambled eggs. So 2 beaten eggs goes into the mix. And then you have 3 1/4 cups of flour. I just use regular all-purpose flour for this recipe. Don't use bread flour or anything in particular, just all-purpose flour. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions, baking related or otherwise, feed those through to Jenny. Now would be a good time for baking related questions before we get to the business later. But also, if throughout the whole thing you have a baking question to mix in with our business ones, that's fine too. So anyway, 3 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. And then last, salt. Remember, always don't put salt in with your yeast, and don't put salt immediately after yeast is blooming, because salt is the enemy of yeast. So 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And that's it. It's pretty easy up to that point. And now what I'm going to go do is go put this on the mixer and let it run in the background while I show you the step that will be after that. So I'm just going to let that run in the background while we move on to, when you're done, when you get to that point, once the dough is ready, and I'll show you what that looks like, hopefully, as long as that takes to mix, I'll show you what the dough will look like when it's mixed. But then you're going to spray some nonstick cooking spray into a bowl. So, and spray it and coat the whole inside. Get a nice layer all around it. And then you're going to drop the dough into that bowl. And then you're going to turn the dough over several times so that the oil from the cooking spray gets on all sides of the dough. So you want it not just to sit in there, but you want to spin it over a couple of times so you get that all over the dough. And then you cover it with a towel and you let it raise for about 2 hours-ish until it's doubled in bulk. And when you get to that point, it's going to look like this in the bowl. It's going to have raised up, and that's what your dough is going to look like. Then you get to the next part. So you take a 1/2 cup of butter. So that's 1 stick of butter, and melt it so it's completely liquid, which I'm not sure how well you all can see what that is, but there's melted butter. And then you take 1 cup of sugar and 4 teaspoons of cinnamon, which I've just put the cinnamon right on top of the sugar. And now I'm going to mix it together, but I wanted you to see it's a full cup of sugar and just 4 teaspoons of cinnamon. But trust me, that's enough cinnamon. Cinnamon's a pretty powerful spice, and you can over cinnamon things fairly easily. So 4 teaspoons of cinnamon in with your 1 cup of sugar, and then you're just going to mix that together until you got a nice mix of those. And it will look fairly light brown in its color. You won't see a lot of the cinnamon, but that's okay, because you don't have a lot in there.
Kevin, while you're mixing that, we have a whole bunch of us who are yeast killers. Can you talk to us a little bit about how to avoid absolutely killing your yeast while baking this, or other things that have yeast in them?
So a couple of things. First, it's mostly with the temperature of the liquid that you put in that affects your yeast. If you put in too cold of a liquid, under 80 degrees, your yeast isn't going to activate. So your yeast will stay dormant, and then it won't rise up in your bread. If your liquid is too hot, it kills the yeast on the other end of it. So the real key to keeping your yeast activated and making it work is the temperature of your liquid and giving it time. make sure you put your liquid and your yeast together and either set them aside while you mix other ingredients or just give it time before you add yeast and liquid, and let them sit for the amount of time until that yeast is activated. That's your key. So
follow-up yeast question about how frequently can it expire? Does the yeast need to be relatively new? How do you know if it's getting too old?
Okay. Well, my yeast has expiration dates on it when I buy it. This one, I bought it probably mid-pandemic, and it doesn't expire until October of 2021. But I keep all of my yeast, so I keep this jar in the refrigerator. So I refrigerate my yeast until it's time to use it. We'd probably have to ask our true faculty experts in nutrition dietetics whether that's really needed or whether some of these things I'm saying are really accurate. I don't claim to be an expert, I just claim to be a guy who likes to bake. But I refrigerate mine, and I've never really had a problem with it. Anything else before I keep going?
I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. So I've got my dough. It's all set. And as soon as you grab it, it's going to release some of the air that's in it, and then it's going to get smaller, and that's fine. So what you want to do next, get your bread pan. This is just a typical 9-inch bread pan. Spray it down, coat it with some nonstick cooking spray, and get that ready. And I like to set up a little assembly line at this point. So I've got my dough, my butter, my cinnamon sugar mixture in the pan. Grab a chunk of the dough, about that big. About when you roll it up, it's going to be a golf ball size or smaller-ish. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be a perfect size. And just roll it into a sphere like that. And then it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth either. In fact, what you're going to notice is most of the time it will have little nooks and crannies in it where the dough doesn't press together. That's actually a good thing, because then what you do is you take it and drop it in the butter, roll it around so it's coated on all sides with the butter, then drop it into the cinnamon sugar mixture and roll it over a few times until it's fully coated all over with cinnamon and sugar. And then you've got that. Those little nooks and crannies that are left will actually get the flavor to go down in those nooks and crannies as you bake it. So it's okay that it's not perfectly smooth. Then you just take it and literally throw it in the pan. Then you grab your next one, roll it up into a ball, into the butter, into the cinnamon and sugar until it's fully coated, and into the pan. Now, what you're going to notice immediately is your fingers are going to get covered in cinnamon and sugar and butter. And that's okay. In fact, it's a good thing. And here's why. Because when you pick up your next one and you start rolling it up, those flavors, that cinnamon and sugar, will get rolled inside some of the pieces of the dough. So you're going to infuse that flavor inside the dough as well as what you put on the outside. So as your fingers get covered with the cinnamon and sugar and butter, that's okay, because it allows you to just infuse the flavor right on the inside of the next one that you roll up. So you just roll them up, butter, cinnamon and sugar, and into the pan. So it's going to start stacking up your pan. Once you have a bottom layer, start the next layer on top of those and stack them up, and just keep doing that until you are done with all of your dough. Use all of it into a pan that size, and you'll fill it up about 1/2 to 3/4 with the dough, and you'll be all set. Now, I'm not going to go through rolling up all of them right now because that will take a little bit, and we don't want to spend our entire time since we have business to do. So next, once you get your bread pan full, then you're going to want to set it aside, and set it aside for about 2 hours. But it can be as little as about an hour. So somewhere between an hour and 2 hours before you bake it. Now, that is also the time, as soon as you set it aside and it's done, a lot of times on holidays, I will make it the night before. So I'll make it the night before, cover it with plastic wrap, and put it in the fridge. And then the next morning, pull it out of the fridge, pull off the plastic wrap, of course, and then bake it. And that works just fine. It will rise overnight, even in the cool of the fridge. Take it out and bake it. Or you could just let it rise and bake it after it rises. So your oven's at 350 degrees for about 35 to 40 minutes. And this is the one I did this morning. So what I do next when they come out is put down some wax paper, or if something else, whatever you want to put it on. Then I usually take a spatula or a knife and I go down the edge of it, because these are really sticky. It's part of what makes them great, but they're really sticky. So you try to get them to come out of the pan. And here is the part that, of all of this that I'm talking about with you this morning, gives me the most anxiety. Is, will they come out of the pan right, or am I going to embarrass myself in front of everyone? We're about to find out, because they are really sticky. But then I take the whole pan and turn it upside down on the wax paper. And yeah, I'm going to embarrass myself because they didn't come out. We're going to try that again. A few of them came out. Usually, if you do this right, you'll get the whole sort of loaf of the pull aparts to come out together. But not today.
While you're doing that, Kevin, we have a couple of follow-up questions. One is, if you decide to put the pull aparts in the fridge the night before, do you have to set them on the counter and let them rise at all, or can they go straight in the oven?
They can go straight in the oven, but remember, it's going to vary your cooking time because they will be colder, but you can go straight in. If you have time to set them on the counter for a half hour, that's what I usually do, but sometimes I go straight from fridge, remove the plastic, and into the oven, and that actually works as well. So
perfect.
Yeah. Okay. We're not going to have a nice loaf of pull aparts this morning.
We've got some comments about that as well. We're saying no judgment. We'd still eat them, totally, and drooling. So
yeah. Well, appreciate that, everybody. Appreciate your support. One of my cardinal rules of this job is I try not to embarrass us as an institution. So I'm hoping that this doesn't get me into that realm, but they are stuck. They're quite stuck this time. So I'm going to do my best to get them out of the pan. There we go. So, yeah, sorry. Presentation today isn't going to raise my grade. So, in theory, you have a nice loaf of pull aparts. Named that because once they're cooked, you pull them apart. And you just pull off the pieces that you want to eat, and they're all set. And that is how you make Aunt Catherine's pull aparts. Yeah.
Awesome. Kevin, how long does it take, since we're doing an abbreviated version today for the demonstration, how long does it take from start to finish?
Maybe 20 minutes. So as I mixed that up while we were talking, this is what your dough is going to look like when it comes out of the mixer or out of the mixing bowl. Just looks like any other bread dough. And so this is where you would drop it into your bowl that's been sprayed down. If I sprayed this one down, you drop it in and just spin it over several times like this to get it coated before you let it rise. That's how you do it. So anyway, thank you all for letting me indulge for a few minutes with one of my favorite recipes. I appreciate it. I hope that if you make these, that you enjoy them as much as I do. And so thanks. So let's get down to business then. What's on your mind today? What do you want to talk about?
So for those of us who are here today, there's a suggestion that we should have some pull aparts delivered in our employee gift tomorrow at Hold Arena.
Wow. I didn't make that many, but thank you. It's a good idea.
And there are tons of thank yous for your demonstration and how awesome it was to see this baking demonstration. So thank you, Kevin, for showing us how to make these.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit here. The first thing that people are wondering about is testing on the spring semester. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, testing. We have the capacity to do it now. We have the equipment and the reagents. That was what took time because people all around the country, all around the world for that matter, are ramping up those programs. So it took us time to get the reagents and a contract with a company that could do the testing, but we now have that capability to do surveillance testing. So the university will implement a mandatory surveillance testing program for the spring semester. This surveillance program is meant for asymptomatic individuals, meaning testing groups of our population that aren't symptomatic and have no known COVID symptoms or exposure. If someone is symptomatic or they have a known COVID exposure, then we're going to have a different faculty, staff, or student testing program to coordinate through the health center, through our district health that we've been partnering with. Those kind of things will remain. But that will be through a different process because we don't want to mix symptomatic or known exposure people with our larger population that is asymptomatic. So we will be having a mandatory surveillance program testing individuals on campus. We're still working on the final details, but we should have a communication going out potentially tomorrow or at the beginning of next week. The program will be mandatory for any faculty, staff, or student that is on campus. If you work on campus, if you come to classes on campus, then you will have to be tested. Those who are working from home, those who are taking classes from home or just online completely will not need to be tested as part of this surveillance program. Except there may be certain rare circumstances as they transition and come to work or come back to campus, we'll have to make sure they get a test. Otherwise, if you're not coming to campus, it won't be mandatory. But if you are going to be on campus, it will be mandatory. But let me also say something else. Sorry, this over answers this question a bit, but it's important to note. This is a surveillance testing program. It is not designed to supplement our other public health measures. It's not going to replace them. It's an addition. Testing is one added layer that's going to help us identify people who are in our population that are asymptomatic. So we still have to maintain face coverings. We have to maintain social distancing. We have to continue with hand washing, and all of those protocols will remain in place. We're not starting to hold events because we have testing. We're not deviating from where we are now. The measures we have in place now have gotten us this far. So we will continue all of them. This is another added layer to our protection to be able to identify people who are asymptomatic and don't know they have it and be able to get them isolation and quarantine before it spreads. The public health experts, and we are taking all of our advice from public health experts and the Centers for Disease Control. They tell us that the rise in cases this winter will be severe. We're already seeing it. So we are implementing this testing program to do everything we can to mitigate the spread of this disease. And we have to remain vigilant on all of our public health measures. So testing will be the added layer to our defenses.
Okay, we have quite a few follow-up questions related to testing. The first is, what about those who are working hybrid schedules? Or if you are working remotely and only step into the office for less than an hour once or twice a month?
If you come to campus with any regularity, or if you come to campus, our policy is going to be you have to be tested. So everyone should continue to follow their social protocols otherwise with their mask, social distancing, and hand washing. Now, if someone just needed to come to campus, pick something up and leave without interacting with others, we're not going to go overboard. We're not going to expect that you need to have a test and do everything else. But it is important that we follow the protocols. And if you are going to be on campus, if you're going to interact with people, if you're going to be in campus for any length of time, then yes, you need to be tested. Otherwise, if you're here for just a short time, then follow the protocols and do not interact with anyone else. So, so that's our answer to that.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Can you clarify what type of test this is? Will this person being tested have something stuck up their nose?
Yeah, Thank you. Good question. No, in fact, it's not a nasal swab. The type that we have secured with the contract we have with the company, there's a couple things about it. One, it is saliva based, so you won't have to have anything swabbed in your nose. The second is that the way they do it is actually self-administered. So you'll come into where we have the testing set up, you'll be handed a tube and a swab. You will actually swab yourself in the cheek, put it in the tube and hand it back. They code it with barcodes so that they can track it and know that it was yours, and that it literally takes like 2 to 3 minutes or less. We know about this program because this is the same program that the NCAA has required for student athletes that are in season. We've been doing this type of test, saliva-based, quick, swab it yourself, put it in the tube for our student athletes. And we know that it works. It literally only takes a couple of minutes and it's not invasive.
So that answers the next question, which was how long do you wait for results? So you said a couple of minutes.
Sorry, a couple of minutes to do the test. It still processes in 24 to 48 hours for results.
Okay. A few more follow-up questions. If we have had COVID this fall, do we have to be tested again? And will the university pay for testing?
Yes, we will not be charging people for this testing. Specific guidelines on who has to be tested, whether or not you can show that you've had it before, and how that works, we will get to soon. The honest answer for me is probably you don't want me to make that decision. We want the public health guidance to make that, and I don't want to just misspeak off the cuff here and copy with Kevin. But I promise you, it will be science-based, not speculation-based. And we will send out all that information on a specific question like that to campus. We'll have either FAQs or other ways where we get this information out.
Okay, more follow-up questions. This one's from YouTube. Will the testing occur on other campuses as well?
Yes, all of our locations.
Okay. And then a repeated follow-up question, how often will the testing occur?
Again, these are details that will be communicated, but it's going to be different for different populations. For example, students who live in residence halls will have a different frequency than other students. So there's students in certain programs that are high contact will have different frequencies than students who aren't in those programs. So ultimately, if you have a presence on campus, we're going to need to have testing. So we'll start with rounds of testing in early January as everyone returns to campus after the break, and then there will be periodic after that. Again, those questions will be answered with science-based and medical-based reasoning as to why, and we will communicate that to everyone.
Okay, is this just testing for positive, negative for COVID, or are antibody tests available as well?
We have both types of tests, but it is going to be the PCR test. The saliva-based test is PCR-based.
Will we be providing testing for students heading out in the various healthcare settings in the community?
Yes, we have capacity to do that. We will do that. And in fact, most of those students, they're requiring it in those healthcare situations. So we will do that.
Where will testing take place, and will insurance cover it?
So we're still working on the location because we want to find the right location that works, and we will communicate that out and where it will be. And I'm pretty sure insurance right now is covering these tests, but here's the key to everyone. The university, we have no intention of passing these costs on to our students or faculty and staff. So that's not going to happen.
Okay, how long will the test results hold that you are safe to come in?
Well, Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the answer to that right now. Again, I promise these answers will be forthcoming. And we will get you the guidelines and the protocols on that when we get the communication out.
If this is mandatory, does it mean loss of your job if you do not wish to participate in the testing?
So, listen, I don't have any intention to threaten somebody with loss of their job. That doesn't do anybody any good. We will have exemptions. If you have a medical reason you shouldn't be tested, or religious preference or otherwise, we're going to work with our employees. If you really don't want to be tested and you refuse, I'm not going to turn that into a major issue. But it means we have to figure out what the telework arrangements are then, so that someone can do their job but not be on campus, because the rule is going to be, if you're going to be on campus, you have to be tested. We'll work with you to work on telework if you do not want to take the test. However, it's important that we all make these small steps to keep each other safe. This is important. This virus can kill people.
Hey, Kevin, if you can hear me, you're frozen on our...
That can be vacation.
Kevin, sorry, you cut off. Would you mind starting that over? You froze a bit, and you left off at COVID is serious and can kill people. That's where the last part we heard.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jenny. If we know there is a measure that can make our campus safer, like surveillance testing, then we need to do it, because this is serious. And so we're going to do it. Now, as a university, as an employer, we have lots of policies and lots of rules. And my expectation for everyone is that if we have these rules in place, we need to follow them. So I don't think we put with every type of policy or rule we have, every one of them doesn't end with comma, and you lose your job if you don't do it. I don't think we need to spell that out. I think we need to say this is the right thing to do, and we will all participate and do it. And if someone really does not want to do it, I get no satisfaction after saying someone has to lose their job. We'll find a way to work through these things. But we need to do the right thing. There is ample evidence that surveillance testing is safer for the population. And so we're going to do it.
Do you test before you come on campus? What if you are asymptomatic and test and are on campus for 48 hours before results?
Well, you have to be tested and get your results before you come on campus.
Okay. We have a message of thank you to you and a note that this person's family lost 2 dear friends in the last 2 months.
Well, that's what we're trying to avoid. This program is designed to keep us all safer. Now, the information that I'm sharing today, I'm sorry that some of these details I don't have to the exact fine detail. Keep in mind, this information that I'm sharing is still developing. We are going to get it communicated to answer these questions. That the real technical questions like, what if I'm asymptomatic and I don't have my test results back? We're going to work through those types of details. Here's what we know. It's not what we think, it's what we know. I've seen the data in the studies of university campuses of similar size that had surveillance testing and those that didn't. And the example that was given to me in the study was 2 universities. They were both of total populations of 30,000, meaning students, faculty, and staff was about 30,000. They were big universities. One of them had surveillance testing in which they caught through a surveillance testing program that wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect, but it caught a lot of cases that were asymptomatic before they could spread them, and that allowed the time for those people to isolate and quarantine out of the population. And the other university did not do surveillance testing, only waited till someone was symptomatic to test and find out. The university that didn't do surveillance testing ended up with 3,000 total cases on their campus last semester. So 10% of their population. The university that did the surveillance testing had 150 cases. 150 with surveillance testing, 3,000 without it. This program can help. I promise you right now, it won't be perfect. But I also won't let perfect be the enemy of the good in this situation. In good conscience, we have the ability to put in place a testing program that will make our campus safer. And that's what we're going to do. And we are going to do it reasonably, medically appropriate. So I'm sorry again, I don't have all of the details. This is developing. We're going to get those out. We will get them communicated. And I appreciate so much all the questions and your patience. And I know everybody wants to know these, and I promise we will get this information to you.
Okay, we have a couple of messages of thanks. The first one is, thank you for taking COVID-19 so seriously and keeping our campus as safe as possible. The second one is, I am proud to be a Bengal and a part of a university who is putting their best foot forward to protecting our community. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Okay, another follow-up testing question. Who will be doing the testing? Which staff? Who will get the information? How does HIPAA play into this?
So the university will remain HIPAA compliant through all of this. The testing program will have adequate controls to ensure the information is managed appropriately. The testing is going to be administered jointly by our university health center and the contracted lab vendors who specialize in these surveillance testing programs. This is what they do. They're doing it right now for other universities in the country. And all staff that are involved in this will also be tested. So the staff that are doing this will have regular testing. So we will have that in place, and the information will go only to your health records. We're not going to be broadcasting or sharing them.
Okay. What about our clinic patients that come to campus? Will they be required to have a negative test before their appointment?
I think what we need to do is not speculate on that. I am going to trust the guidance of our healthcare professionals. Our healthcare professionals that are setting up the guidelines of how they run their clinics and do it medically appropriate. I'm going to trust them to do it.
Okay, how about community members who walk onto campus?
One of the things that is very important to, I think, us as a university is that we do not build barriers between our community and our campus. I don't want to put up a fence around the campus, either real or metaphorical. So I'm not going to go as far as say no one is allowed to walk across campus unless they have a test. We have to be reasonable about this. We're going to put in a testing program that helps us reduce our risk. It is not going to be 100% to eliminate all risk. This program is one of many tools that we have, and if we do it right, we will become safer. Short answer is I don't intend to tell members of the community you're not allowed to walk on campus during the evening unless you can demonstrate and show you have a test. That's not our plan.
Okay, couple of thank you messages. The first one is thank you for putting this into place and grounding it in science. The second is, could we thank Chris Owens and the COVID committee? They have been speedy and open handling of requests for social distancing waivers.
Yes, we can. We can thank that committee because they have done a lot of work, amazing amount of work, and the burden that they have shouldered is admirable.
Okay, next question. We have a couple that are kind of related. One is, can you explain to us if we will continue to work from home where possible for the spring semester? And another one related to the spring semester, What is our plan for spring? There are some rumors going around that we're going fully online. Is this just a rumor? Any light on what we can expect come January 11th would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we will continue our telework and work from home arrangements in the spring. There's no plan to change where we are now. And there's no plan to change the semester and our classes from where they are now. In other words, our spring semester is going to mirror our fall semester in terms of which classes and labs are in person, which ones are high flex, which are hybrid, which are online. It's going to mirror the fall semester in most ways. There may be a few differences here and there, but there always is fall to spring. But in terms of our policies and our guidelines are going to remain the same. We are not going to 100% online. I think we have just demonstrated that face coverings, social distancing, hand washing, and being mindful of those works. We're going to add the testing to that. And right now we plan to start our spring semester under those same conditions that we ran our fall semester. And for all of our employees, same rules in terms of telework.
Okay. Another note of thanks. This is a relief to hear that we will have access to testing to protect us and our families. Thank you. Related to testing, will the state of Idaho money that the university received for COVID pay for this? How will the university cover this cost?
Okay, we have up to date received some of the federal stimulus and relief money that we have been spending to ramp up this capacity with tests and the equipment. And we are still hoping to receive additional funds. We have made a request to the state for access to some of the state's higher education stabilization fund money to fund this. We don't know the answer to that yet, and we won't know that till January, but we have made requests for both the federal relief funds and to the state relief funds to help cover the costs. Regardless though, whether those requests come through, this surveillance testing program is the right thing to do. And we are going to do it. And it will cost us money. And if we have to rely on reserves, then that's what we will do, because this is the right program for us to have for the health and safety of our community.
Okay. For staff who were approved to work from home with disability services review, will that be reviewed again, or do we assume the approvals were extended through spring?
Well, good question. I don't know the specific answer to that, but I'll ask about it. So I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer on whether those reviews, how long they last, but we'll ask HR and we'll get some responses back to you. If you've asked that question into Jenny, hopefully we can get the response back out.
Okay, switching gears just a little bit from testing to vaccines. Could you speak on the potential availability of vaccines for students, faculty, and staff? And then a follow-up question, will they be required?
Okay. So first, let's talk about availability. So about 6 weeks ago-ish, I ended up in the meeting with Dr. Birx from the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And we specifically talked about vaccinations. I asked the question about vaccination distribution and what the university's role in, including our health science mission, how we could help, et cetera. I'm going to tell you the same explanation that she told me. So this is coming from the White House Task Force, and Dr. Birx is a medical expert as part of that. The United States has right now secured 100 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine and 100 million doses of the Moderna vaccine. So that's 200 million. But each of those you have to take twice. So it's really 100 million people worth of vaccinations that the United States has thus far secured in the first round. She said that the first distribution of vaccines in the United States will go to healthcare workers. It will go to frontline healthcare providers. And then it will go to people who have documented comorbidity conditions, meaning those who are most likely to have severe complications or death from the COVID virus. That's the sequence: healthcare providers, and then to people with comorbidity. And then she pointed out, and she said, there are 85 million people in the United States with comorbidity, documented comorbidity, and then plus the healthcare workers. Essentially, those first 100 million of doses are already spoken for. And then she said, remember that college and university populations are considered one of the healthier and less susceptible. And then she looked at me plainly and she said, looked right at me and she said, frankly, colleges and universities are going to be low on the list for distribution of vaccines, which means we're going to be a while. Doesn't mean it won't happen. It means we need to be realistic that we are going to be later in the distribution than other populations. Now, in Idaho, the governor put together a task force on vaccinations. They have to submit a plan to the federal government on how those vaccines will be distributed, and that is the governor's prerogative. And the governor and his vaccination committee is working on a distribution plan. And we will be built into that plan at some point. Higher education, in our higher ed system, we have representation on that committee and on that task force that is developing that plan. So that's what I've been told about how vaccine distribution will come, which means this: we have to stay the course. We have to continue with the testing program, with face coverings, with social distancing, with hand washing, because it's going to be a while before that vaccines make it to our population. So we have to continue our measures. We have to stay vigilant. Now, the second part of that question was about mandatory nature of vaccines. We have not yet made that decision. We have not yet got to that decision of whether we will require them or not. This is a weighty issue. It's a weighty issue in which we have to have a campus conversation. We don't expect to have widespread vaccine distribution at the beginning of next semester, so we're going to have time to have that conversation. We're going to circulate this concept with our campus. We're going to gather feedback. We're going to talk about it from faculty, staff, and students, and we're going to have that conversation, and we will get to a decision. We're not there yet. I hope everybody knows that I understand that the decisions that come out of my office affect everybody. They affect all of you. All of you are impacted by these decisions. You're all affected by them. I want you all to know that I understand. That weighs heavily on these types of issues. So we will take input. We will talk about it. It won't just be a decision that I make, comes out of my office. We're going to have a conversation about it because it's important. And because everybody is impacted by it. So we will talk about it over the course of the spring for when we get those vaccines, and we'll be ready for it. And we'll make a decision.
Next is wonderment if a poll similar to national polls asking campus populations about their willingness to get vaccinated might help know how many people are going to be considered under these discussions.
We could consider that. I'm not opposed to it.
Okay, and Kevin, we're going to switch gears completely to budget. What is the prognosis for state budget support for the next fiscal year?
We don't know. The governor unveils his budget recommendation right before the start of the legislative session in January. But we are hopeful. We're hopeful that given the state's budget situation overall, that the state's in a positive budget situation. So we're hoping that we have some level of good news coming out of the budgets for next year, but we don't know. So we will wait and see what that looks like. I am optimistic. I'm hopeful, and we will see what happens.
Okay, sorry, scrolling through all the testing questions. Okay, so this one is a very specific question.
Okay.
Cozy is hiring more faculty than the amount of faculty lost during this year due to COVID. Would you help us build team trust by explaining how this expansion is possible next year when employees are asked to take furloughs this year?
Okay. That's a fully legitimate question. I don't have right in front of me the details on this specific issue, but let me talk about this a little more generally. We have budgeted positions, but many of which are on hold and will be on hold for many months while we underwent the hiring freeze we were under and where we are looking for. Certain positions were approved for hire, but in each of those cases, we approved positions that were specifically tied to maintaining enrollment and meeting our core mission of education. So we're looking at each position intentionally and only moving those forward that make strategic sense. So each of those positions has been viewed as to how they impact the enrollments we have going forward and how enrollments change over time and meeting the needs of our students. So positions that have been approved have been through that analysis. So let me talk about furloughs. I know furloughs have been challenging for everyone. Everybody's pay essentially was reduced, and it's not a good thing, but it's what we had to do. I'm very grateful to everyone as to how we weathered this storm and the fact that we weathered it together, that everybody was involved. This hasn't been easy, but I'm hopeful that through what we had to do this year in furloughs being one-time savings, we will be in a position next year that helped us stabilize so that we can make the right decisions about how we hire faculty and staff to meet our mission going forward. So thank you all for the fact that we did weather this together. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Those are all the questions that I have on my end. I would love to turn it back over to you for any closing thoughts.
Okay. Well, a couple of things then. First, thank you all for tuning in today. I always appreciate these conversations. I appreciate that we can talk about these things. I appreciate that we've continued them over Zoom when we can't do them in person. 2 years ago, when I sent out my December message, I talked about the story of Apollo 8 and Frank Borman and Bill Anders and Jim Lovell being the first humans to make it to the moon. And the picture that they sent back, one of the most reproduced pictures in history, first time the Earth was ever seen from space. And talked about the story that they were talking about what they saw back on the Earth and that it was good, that the Earth was good. We have been through a lot on this entire planet and in our society and on our campus. The last 9 months, we've been through a lot, and it's been hard. And we've had to take furloughs. We've had to see people that we work with who lost their jobs. We had to deal with sickness. We've had to deal with death. We've had to come together as a campus community and not only survive that, but find a way to thrive in that and meet our mission to educate our students who come to us so that they can live a better life. And we did it. So I appreciate everybody. And now it's the holiday season. And it's time for us to take a little time off. It's time for us to get a break. And at the same time, be proud of what we did accomplish. So I hope everyone knows how proud I am of this institution and everybody. And we will continue to make the decisions we need to go forward. And in some small measure, I hope that you get a chance to make these pull aparts and enjoy them. So thank you all for tuning in today and for all that you do. So have a good day, everybody.